The monotonous drone of four Allison turboprop engines filled our headsets, a steady hum against the pitch black of a moonless winter night in 1970. We were holding steady at 10,000 feet over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in southern Laos. Suddenly, the sensor operator's panel chimed. The Black Crow system had just picked up the electromagnetic pulse of Soviet ZIL truck ignition coils hidden deep under the jungle canopy. Up front in the left seat, I pushed the yoke and dipped our left wing exactly 30 degrees. Back in the unpressurized cargo box, lit only by dim red tactical lamps, the air tasted of hydraulic fluid and cold sweat. The intercom cracked with a calm voice stating the target was acquired. Before I could give the order to fire, the darkness below flashed. 3 glowing orange spheres of 37mm flak surged toward our nose, ripping past my side window with a hollow thump that shook the glass. The math was about to collect. This was Operation Commando Hunt, and our job in the 16th Special Operations Squadron out of Ubon, Thailand, was to strangle the North Vietnamese Army supply lines. Those supply convoys moved exclusively at night under heavy canopy, rendering fast jet fighters useless. Tonight, you will learn the lethal geometry of the pylon turn, the maneuver that made our entire mission possible. You will see the freezing, smoke-filled reality of the young gunners working in the back of an unpressurized cargo plane while the ground fired back, and you will discover why calling our aircraft spooky is a mistake no veteran of this squadron would ever make. We flew 14 men in a heavily loaded machine, turning a transport plane into a flying siege engine. We hunted radar-guided anti-aircraft batteries, trading fire in the dark. If you want the version of this war that they do not put in textbooks, stay with me. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Taking off from Ubon meant feeling the immense weight of an AC-130A loaded with tons of ammunition. The oppressive heat of the Thai tarmac baked the aluminum skin before we began our climb into the cooling altitudes. We were flying a modified C-130 cargo plane into airspace where high-speed jets were routinely shot down. To survive, we relied on darkness and highly specialized technology. Once we reached our transit altitude and crossed into the target zone, the aircraft was depressurized. The gunners in the back, mostly kids between 19 and 22, hooked up their oxygen lines and opened the firing doors to the freezing air at 10,000 feet. The sudden drop in temperature hit like a physical punch. We traded the sweltering heat of the runway for sub-zero winds whipping through the open hatches. A tense silence settled over the intercom system as we stared into the black void below. Every man on board knew the North Vietnamese were waiting for us. The public perception is that the United States Air Force controlled the skies over Vietnam without any real contest. The reality over the trail was a different story entirely. The North Vietnamese Army assembled the densest radar-controlled anti-aircraft network seen since the end of the Second World War. We were not hunting isolated guerrillas in pajamas. We were targeting armored convoys protected by disciplined, camouflaged gun crews. They operated Soviet-made 14.5mm heavy machine guns, 37mm cannons, and 57mm radar-guided systems. These gunners used lone supply trucks as bait, setting up elaborate kill boxes, just waiting for an aircraft to circle overhead. Our aircraft, the Spectre, was engineered specifically to break this defensive network. Between 1968 and 1972, we flew night after night into these traps. The enemy knew our exact flight profiles, and they possessed the range and the firepower to reach us at 10,000 feet. The men in the cargo box had to trust the pilots with their lives. Operating inside the cargo compartment, known to the crew simply as the box, required a specific kind of endurance. The young enlisted gunners wore heavy safety harnesses strapped tight to the floor so they would not fall out of the open firing doors when the aircraft banked sharply. They wore thick, fire-resistant gloves to keep the blistering heat of spent brass casings from burning their skin down to the bone. The air was thin, cold, and chronically laced with the sulfurous smell of cordite. Up front in the booth, the sensor operator sat in total darkness, staring intently at the bright green glow of the infrared screen. He was the only man on board who could clearly see the ground. His calm voice over the intercom dictated whether we lived or died on any given pass. As the pilot, my job was to keep the aiming reticle perfectly aligned while the airframe shuddered under the recoil of our own heavy weapons. Finding a camouflaged truck moving under triple canopy jungle in the dead of night requires more than just good eyesight. The electronic warfare officer would activate the Black Crow system, a highly sensitive receiver designed to pick up the specific electromagnetic emissions of vehicle ignition coils. It sounded like a synthetic Geiger counter in our headsets, a rhythmic beeping that increased in tempo as we closed the distance. Once we had a general location, the infrared operator took over, scanning the black landscape for white-hot thermal signatures. He would lock onto the heat of an engine block or a hidden exhaust pipe and pass those precise coordinates up to the cockpit. The unbreakable focus required to read those green screens meant the operator had to tune out the roar of the 4 turboprops and the freezing wind tearing through the fuselage. He would call out the target confirmation, leaving me to initiate the maneuver that defined our entire existence in that airspace. Standard fighter jets deliver ordnance by diving, firing for 2 seconds, and pulling up hard to avoid ground fire. The AC-130 does something entirely different. All of our weapons, the 20mm Vulcan rotary cannons and the 40mm Bofors cannons, were mounted on the left side of the fuselage, pointing perpendicular to our line of flight. To engage, I would roll the aircraft into a steep left bank and fly a continuous perfect circle. Geometrically, this created an imaginary cone in the sky. The nose of the aircraft traced the wide base of the cone at 10,000 feet, while all of our side-firing guns pointed continuously down at the vertex of that cone on the ground. This maneuver, known as the pylon turn, allowed us to keep sustained, pinpoint fire on a single target for minutes at a time rather than seconds. The physical toll on the gunners in the back was immediate as gravity pushed them against the tilted metal floor. Executing the pylon turn meant I did not use a traditional manual trigger to fire the cannons. Our fire control system integrated airspeed, altitude, and bank angle into a single firing solution. When the crosshairs on my aiming reticle aligned with the coordinates provided by the infrared operator, the system took over. The 20mm Vulcans spun up, sending 2,500 rounds per minute down to the jungle floor, while the 40mm Bofors added 120 high-explosive shells per minute to the barrage. We could concentrate all that lead into an area the size of a tennis court. The entire airframe would vibrate so hard my teeth rattled, and the box would instantly fill with thick, choking gun smoke. If the exhaust fans failed, the gunners would be blinded by the gray fog. We watched the tracer rounds form a solid red funnel from the aircraft to the dirt, waiting for the secondary explosions that proved we hit ammunition. The primary flaw of the pylon turn is predictability. To maintain that perfect cone of fire, the aircraft must fly a constant speed at a constant bank angle. Any competent anti-aircraft gunner with a fire can radar system can easily calculate exactly where we will be in the next 3 seconds. We were a massive, slow-moving target suspended in the night sky. The illumination operator stationed on the aft deck would scan the black horizon for the telltale flashes of muzzle fire on the ground. We relied on his eyes and his quick call-outs to break the turn before the flak reached our altitude. We traded agility for sustained firepower, a gamble we took every time we banked the wing. We were dropping fire into the enemy's backyard, and they possessed every tool needed to swat us out of the sky. The tension in the intercom was a physical weight as we waited for the ground to light up. You might see movies and think we just hovered up there, pouring fire into the jungle without consequence, untouchable in the dark. Let me correct that right now. We faced radar-guided 57mm batteries that could easily reach 20,000 feet. We lost 6 heavy aircraft and 52 crew members during this conflict. We did not shoot with impunity. We traded heavy artillery fire with disciplined gun crews who wanted us dead. Another common error is the name. Many people call the AC-130 spooky. That was the call sign for the older, smaller AC-47 piston engine plane. Our call sign was Spectre. The 16th Squadron flew with a ghost, holding a hatchet painted on our emblem, and no man who flew in these aircraft would ever confuse the two. We were a different beast entirely, built for a different kind of war. I want to know what you actually thought the Spectre was before you heard this. Drop it in the comments. The rhythmic thud of the Bofors was abruptly cut short by a scream over the radio. AA at 3 o'clock. The illumination operator spotted the ground flashes. The North Vietnamese had opened up with their 37mm and 57mm cannons. A deep, heavy pop echoed outside the fuselage, followed by a massive shudder that sent a jolt up my spine through the metal seat. An explosive shell had detonated just a few yards from our right wing. To survive, I had to break the firing turn instantly. I ripped the yoke hard right and pitched the nose, throwing the aircraft out of the predictable circular path. In the back, the sudden shift in gravity threw the standing gunners off their feet. Spent brass casings, thousands of them, slid across the slick cargo floor in a chaotic wave. The airframe groaned under the sudden stress of the evasive maneuver. We lost the firing solution, but we bought ourselves a few seconds of life. Instead of running away from the anti-aircraft fire, our squadron doctrine dictated that we neutralize the threat. I leveled the wings, bled off some airspeed, and rolled back into a new pylon turn, this time focusing all our sensors on the origin of the enemy muzzle flashes. We ignored the supply trucks. The primary target was now the gun battery. Sweat stung my eyes as I listened to the infrared operator making microscopic adjustments to the coordinates. We were entering a direct duel between a flying cannon and an armored ground emplacement. The Vulcans spun up again, a mechanical roar that drowned out the wind, while the Bofors pounded a steady rhythm. We poured high explosives directly into the enemy radar dish. The exchange required cold precision, while the air around us filled with black smoke and orange shrapnel bursts. We had to silence their guns before they corrected their aim. The math was simple. Whoever landed the next hit would survive. By 1972, the North Vietnamese altered the equation on the trail. As we circled the neutralized anti-aircraft site, a new high-pitched siren pierced our headsets. The missile launch warning system triggered. Down in the jungle, a soldier had just fired a shoulder-launched SA-7 Grail, a heat-seeking surface-to-air missile. A cold panic gripped the cockpit. You cannot outmaneuver a supersonic missile in a 4-engine cargo plane flying at 200 knots. The electronic warfare officer instantly deployed our magnesium flares. A series of blinding white flashes illuminated the night sky, casting long, sharp shadows through the cockpit windows. We watched a streak of intense fire rocket past our right wing, chasing the heat of the descending flares instead of our engine exhaust. The missile detonated a safe distance away, a harmless spark in the dark. The magnesium burned out, plunging us back into the pitch black. The silence on the intercom returned, heavy with the realization of how close that just was. After hours on station, dodging flak and expending thousands of rounds, the flight engineer monitored our fuel status. We were nearing our loiter limit, the maximum time we could circle the target area before turning back to U-Bahn. The engines maintained a steady hum, and a strange, ringing silence settled over the aircraft whenever the cannons paused. The thick smell of cordite was permanently pressed into our flight suits. The gunners in the back swept the massive piles of brass casings away from the open doors, their hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. We thought we had mapped every threat in the sector, locking our sensors onto a large fuel storage target for one final pass. We initiated the left bank, settling the heavy aircraft into a predictable groove at 10,000 feet, waiting for the reticle to align perfectly. We had no idea they were tracking our every movement from the ground. What happens next took less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds that changed the entire mission. We had flown directly into a prepared kill box. The North Vietnamese had used the fuel depot as bait. As soon as we committed to the pylon turn, 3 separate, hidden 57mm batteries powered up their fire can radars simultaneously. They had overlapping fields of fire, creating a web of lethal trajectories right through our flight path. The interior of the aircraft flashed with 3 distinct light sources: the red flames spitting from the muzzles of our own Bofors cannons, the bright green strobes of the radar warning receiver on the instrument panel, and the apocalyptic glare of anti-aircraft shells detonating in the air just outside the fuselage. A single direct hit from a 57mm shell would not just bring the plane down, it would ignite the thousands of unspent rounds still stacked in the cargo box, vaporizing the entire crew in a fraction of a second. The radar warning tone shifted to a solid, continuous scream. The logical reaction to a radar lock is to break the turn and fly straight out of the threat zone at maximum speed. That is exactly what the enemy radar operators calculated we would do. If I leveled the wings, their analog computers would easily track our linear path and put a shell right through the cockpit. Instead, survival demanded flawless communication and erratic movement. The scanner positioned at the rear of the aircraft called out the exact clock angles of the ground flashes. Working off his voice, I shoved the yoke forward, dropping our altitude aggressively, then hauled it back while rolling the wings back and forth. I broke the predictable circle, throwing the 80-ton aircraft through a series of sharp, shifting arcs. In the back, the gunners were slammed against the bulkheads, holding onto their safety harnesses as the floor dropped out from under them. We were a massive pendulum swinging wildly through a field of exploding steel. While I fought the yoke, the electronic warfare officer engaged our active radar jamming systems. He flooded the enemy frequencies with electronic noise, fighting to blind their targeting computers for just a few vital seconds. We needed to disrupt their firing solution long enough to slide out of the deadly intersection of their guns. The aircraft shuddered hard as a shell burst close enough to pepper the left wing with shrapnel. I heard the hiss of air leaking through coin-sized holes in the fuselage, an eerie whistling noise that cut through the roar of the engines. Despite the chaos, the sensor operator kept his eyes glued to the infrared screen. He never raised his voice, calmly feeding me the adjusted coordinates of the central radar dish guiding the enemy guns. We had to kill the brain of the battery. I brought the nose around, lining up the reticle one last time while flying evasively. The math was closing in on us. The Vulcans and the Bofors answered the threat. We poured a concentrated stream of 20mm and 40mm shells straight down the throat of the central battery. I felt the sharp recoil of the guns fighting against my control inputs. We held the trigger until a massive secondary explosion on the ground briefly turned night into day. The solid warning tone in our headsets finally ceased. The electronic jamming and the erratic maneuvers had bought us just enough time to deliver the fatal blow. The remaining 2 enemy guns ceased firing, their radar guidance destroyed. I leveled the aircraft, pulling us up and away from the trail. My flight suit was soaked through with sweat, sticking to the seat cushions. We did not cheer or celebrate. The flight engineer calmly reported that we were losing hydraulic pressure from the shrapnel damage to the wing. We had survived the kill box, but the aircraft was bleeding, and we still had a long way home. The transit back to Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base was tense. The hydraulic fluid leak meant we had to prepare for an emergency landing with partially inoperable brakes. As the wheels hit the concrete runway, I fought the rudder pedals to keep the heavy aircraft centered. We rolled to a stop, and the fire rescue crews immediately swarmed the airframe to assess the damage. The ticking sound of hot engine metal cooling in the night air was the only noise on the tarmac. Stepping out of the aircraft, my hands shook just enough to make lighting a cigarette a difficult task. The ground crew counted 20 shrapnel holes near the main fuel lines. We walked into the fluorescent glare of the intelligence briefing room, handing over the heavy videotapes from our sensor cameras. The intelligence officers needed the footage to confirm the battle damage assessment, counting the destroyed trucks and silenced guns. The exhaustion settled deep into our bones, heavier than the gear we carried. There was no immediate glory waiting for us in that debriefing room. The human cost of operating the Spectre was measured in chronic wear and tear. The gunners who worked the box suffered from severe back problems, a direct result of hauling heavy ammunition belts while standing on a floor that vibrated continuously for hours. Many developed permanent hearing loss from the concussive blasts of the cannons firing in an enclosed steel space. Mentally, the toll was unique to our squadron. We were not dropping bombs blindly from 30,000 feet. Through the high-resolution sensor screens, we watched our targets get torn apart in stark detail. It was an intimate way to wage a detached aerial war, creating a psychological burden that few outside the special operations community understood. We drank stale coffee under the flickering lights, knowing we had to sleep through the day just to wake up and do it all over again the next night. The Spectre proved that the gunship concept was the most lethal night interdiction platform ever devised. By the end of Operation Commando Hunt, the Air Force claimed we had destroyed over 10,000 trucks along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. However, those numbers sparked a historical dispute that lasts to this day. Intelligence agencies, including the CIA, heavily contested the math. They argued that the North Vietnamese faked battle damage to fool our cameras, that our sensors sometimes read campfires as vehicle ignitions, and that the enemy replaced truck parts so quickly that our true impact on their logistics was much lower. You will find experts who swear by our kill counts and analysts who cut them in half. Whatever the true number, the North Vietnamese respected our firepower enough to dedicate their best anti-aircraft resources to hunting us down. They feared the slow-moving cargo plane more than the fast jets. The truth was written in the shrapnel holes. Despite the disputes over truck counts, the tactical impact of the AC-130 was undeniable. The doctrine we forged in the dark skies over Laos became the foundation for decades of future warfare. The aircraft evolved, eventually incorporating a massive 105mm field artillery howitzer fired directly out the side door, allowing crews to strike from higher altitudes above the reach of shoulder-fired missiles. The descendants of our old A models, like the modern J model Ghost Rider, serve as the cornerstone of close air support for Special Forces units today. The men flying over Iraq and Afghanistan relied on the same pylon-turn geometry and the same integration of sensors and heavy cannons that we perfected under fire. We took a vulnerable transport plane and turned it into an apex predator. The equipment got digital and the screens got sharper, but the core mechanics of circling a target in the dark remain exactly as we left them. The true foundation of night interdiction was built in those unpressurized cabins. 52 crew members never came back from those night missions over the trail. They died in the freezing, unpressurized cargo boxes of a converted transport plane, trading fire with radar-guided cannons so the convoys below would not reach their destinations. When I look back at my time in the 16th Squadron, I do not think about the grand strategy or the disputed statistics. I remember the sour smell of burnt hydraulic fluid, the bone-rattling vibration of the Vulcans spinning up, and the sight of 37mm tracers rising like glowing golf balls through the black canopy. We fought an intense, close-quarters war from 10,000 feet in the air, relying on nothing but the men beside us and the aluminum skin of our aircraft. The Spectre was a machine built for the darkest hours of the conflict, flown by men who willingly stepped into the crosshairs every night. If this story deserved to be told, make sure someone else gets to hear it.